Richard.
Dermot, great to see you again.
Welcome back to the Mindful Podcast.
Thank you for having me.
We're going to talk about grief.
Yeah.
Okay. When I was coming in here for our chat, I saw the image in my head of a prism, and I was trying to work out my own relationship to grief. And I saw the prism in my mind. And I guess, I don't know whether this is right or wrong, or maybe you can tell me if I'm on the right track. But for me, grief would seem like a prism that, depending on the kind of grief you're dealing with, you can see it from different angles.
Yeah.
And I guess, like the Pink Floyd album cover, the light's going to be refracted in different ways, and your experience of it will be different. From my own experience, I've lost both my parents. It's very sad, and I miss them. I guess with our parents, we sort of expect them to go before us. But there are other types of grief that
Absolutely.
I'm sure you encounter in your work, and you have to help people navigate those. What's your own experience with helping people through grief?
Yeah, that's it's a really interesting insight, the way you presented that there, Dermot. This is why I love doing your podcast, because you've got great insights and you think of things in very unusual ways, which is great, And the Pink Floyd reference.
I wasn't expecting that one myself.
Exactly, no, but it's true. And you touched on something so, such an insight there, a penetrating insight, is that there's no right way to grieve, and there's no one way to grieve. And it's a profoundly personal experience that we all, as we move through life, experience in different ways, in varying degrees, because someone dying is a very literal concept of grief. Both my parents are alive, but I definitely grieved over the years my relationship with my father, because it was very difficult, and there wasn't a warm or connected kind of relationship. And I remember this when my friend died. When my friend's father died when we were 22. I remember being at the funeral and being kind of like envious of his feelings of grief for his father. So, because I was grieving the loss of a relationship that I didn't really lose, if you know what I mean. I wasn't connected to my father, and I wasn't talking to him at that point. So I was grieving that loss, but it wasn't a physical death, if you understand what I'm saying. So we grieve in so many different ways.
Yeah, I can relate to that. I lost my mum to dementia the year before last.
Oh God, that was very hard. No, I'm sorry to hear that. Yeah.
Thank you. And I guess anyone who is dealing with dementia in their own lives will probably relate to what I'm saying, in that you feel like they're slipping away.
Yeah.
You're grieving them over time
As it's
while they're still
incrementally.
here.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
That's it. We experience. I mean, so much of our life is loss. You know what I mean? It is. There's so much of our life is coming to terms with loss. So much of our life is changing all the time, and things get a little bit lost in that change. And so there's a lot of we have to experience grief as we move through life.
But
and
death is so certain.
It's so final.
Why? But we know it's the great guarantees. You're going to be born. You're going to die. You're going to lose people around you. It's absolutely guaranteed. Why? What part of our brain refuses to acknowledge it? That we just go, la, 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 blinkers on. But we know, we just know that sadly we're going to have to say goodbye to people that we love. It's an absolute guarantee, but we resist it so much.
And we're going to say goodbye to this world that we love.
Yeah.
I often think It Never Let Me Go. Did you ever read that novel by Ishiguro?
No.
Where it's about clones, and it's kind of like a fake 90s world, kind of like, and they're creating these clones to give us humans organs and all that. But the clones have to come to terms with the fact that they're going to die at 25, 26. And it's all about that disturbing reality of you have to come. I think he's talking about us, really,
Yeah.
that we all have to in some ways come to terms with this inevitability that's there. And I suppose we help to kind of offset that by thinking, well, we don't know what that is, and we don't know what that if that is a finality or not. So that allows us to kind of manage this ultimate catastrophe, I suppose, in some ways.
Can we dig down into maybe some of those different angles on grief?
Absolutely.
And how it impacts families. So much of your work is with families, and so let's take the death of a partner. A spouse, our life partner. How do you see that rippling through a family, and how do people begin to navigate that kind of thing?
I've worked with that so many times, over the years. I'm just thinking of a few cases I've worked with. For children, I suppose, it ruptures their sense of self, because the parents are such pillars. You don't expect your parents when you're a child, you don't ever think of them dying. You know, as you get older, you understand concepts of time and moving forward. But when you're 8 or 9, and those really important moments, those important times where you're telling yourself about the story about who you are, and a parent dies, it fundamentally can rupture your every concrete norm that you hold. I don't know, did you ever study Hamlet?
No, I did other plays.
Did you? Yeah. Hamlet.
The Scottish play.
Don't even mention Macbeth. I'm grand, I'm not an actor. I'm grand. But Hamlet to me should be called Grief, you know, because the play is about his father dying early. And the whole thing that he's dealing with, because we talk about is like, you know, his fundamental flaws, hamartia is like procrastination, whatever. It's grief. He is absolutely torn apart by his father's early death. And he comes to see the world. It's all like his worldview is tainted through that prism of grief. Everything he sees is, you know, completely tainted through the prism of grief. And that's what happens. I think that's what can happen with children. They come to kind of course, the mourning for the parent that's lost, but the idea that things are certain, that's a terrible realization for a child, that there is no certainty here and there's no guarantee that anyone's going to live whatever timeline in your life.
Yeah.
And it can really disrupt.
It's the pin in the balloon.
Yeah, exactly, it is. Yeah, it's the end of innocence, and so it can really disrupt themselves, their concepts of themselves and their movement towards adulthood and all that. So it really plays out in there disrupting the sense of self. And I suppose what I often see with partners who are left, the language around death really gets to them. How people speak about death really gets to them.
Because people are trying to say the right thing.
People are trying to say the right thing, and
trying
euphemisms.
not to say the wrong thing.
And then trying not to say death, you know, I'm sorry that say Sinead died.
Yeah.
They don't want to say died. So they'll come up with all sorts of she lost her battle with, you know, and you know, I've heard so many. I have a friend of mine particularly who I'm thinking of, and he said it drives me nuts when people try to sugarcoat that I've lost my wife's dead, and they're trying to come out and say, you know, he understands what it is. It's awkwardness.
Yeah.
We find death talk difficult to kind of do. You know, what do you say to someone when they've lost somebody? And language sometimes fails us. We don't have the words to actually express what it is that's happened.
Yeah. Well, we've very little training around grief.
Yeah, we do.
You know, you
yeah,
don't do
yeah.
grief classes in school.
No, you don't.
You're
no.
you're looking, when you're a kid, you're looking to the adults at funerals. So what are they saying and how are they acting? And maybe that's how I do it. Or,
exactly.
you know,
That's
we
the
kind of
template,
learn by default. If you are trying to help a young child through grief, the loss of a parent, let's say, for example, what do you do with them?
Yeah, it's really good. I suppose the first thing you're trying to do is bring them into contact with validating their feelings, because a lot of the adult world will be telling them, like, you know, this will pass and, you know, you'll get over this and you'll feel better and time will heal this. You know, the adult world might often be trying to push them quickly because it's uncomfortable for the adult world to see a child really with these feelings.
Yeah.
And what I do in therapy is, like, let's hear the feelings. Just say, if it was mom, what did mom do that you really, you know, what did yourself and mom do that you loved, you know? And so you're bringing the person back into contact with that relationship. And so what you're trying to do is get them to experience it, because the worst thing we can do is deny it or suppress it.
Yeah.
You're trying to get them to move through it. I'm always thinking about the commemoration part will be towards the end of this grieving process. I mean, as much as there's an end, I suppose. But, you know, you're trying to move them from really experiencing the feelings. And when you sit sometimes in therapy with someone who's just crying because they're in that moment, you know, with that loss, you're not trying to stop that. You're trying to let them to validate that.
Yeah. Do you find if people are able to contact that part of themselves that is okay with letting it out?
That's a cathartic thing.
Yeah. Do you find they will be maybe get through the process a little bit healthier?
Healthier, for sure. And at the end of that session, you know, I'd often have that. And at the end of it, it could just be very few words been spoken between us. Very few words. We're sitting there and the person's emotional. And at the end, I'd say to the person you're working with, I'd say, how does it feel now? You know, as we're coming to the end of the conversation, how's it feel? And they'd always say, I feel a little lighter. Because they've acknowledged, this is how I feel, this is terrible. As we're actually saying this, I'm thinking about my own grandmother who lived with me for 25 years. I actually can feel some emotions coming up for me. It's mad, yeah. Because, you know, she was like a parent to me. She lived in her little kind of like garage next door, so I used to spend so much time in a room with her for 20-something years, you know. When she broke her hip, I took time out of college just to help her convalesce, and we used to, you know, we were just great friends. And when she died, she was 94. Like, you know what I mean? I knew she wasn't going to live for another 94 years, as much as she thought she might. But it's just, that's never kind of gone.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
You don't want it to be gone.
No,
either,
you don't,
do
exactly.
Because when you think of her there now, I'm sure she's larger than life in your mind.
Yeah, and I hear her voice.
Yeah.
And I hear her speaking to me. When I had my 3 daughters, I knew she would, that's the sadness of life. She didn't get to see them, and she would love to have had girls. As herself, you know, she would love to have grandkids who were girls, and she didn't get to see them, and that's the sadness of life. But I still have her talking to me.
Yeah.
And so, and I suppose that's where I go with that grief is, that's there. I'm not denying that. That's a part of who I am.
Yeah.
And it's there, and I can touch into it. But I also celebrate that I was lucky enough to have that relationship with her. I suppose that's what you're trying to get, you know, people who are really grieving to move towards is commemorating the person and, you know, how would they like you to live now?
Do you get people who are angry at their partner for leaving them?
Yeah. Yeah, I've heard that many times. And it depends on how someone died as well, you know. There can be a real anger around, you know, suicide and what you're left with and confusion.
Is that a different grief, do you think, suicide?
It's probably more troubling.
Yeah.
You know, it's probably more troubling. When someone dies of natural causes and those kind of things, I think you can maybe help yourself to think of the natural way of life, and maybe they had cancer, there was an illness there that they fought with, and all those kind of things. But suicide, I think there's still a stigma around it. It's a difficult conversation, and I think the family and particularly the parent can feel that stigma. What did I do wrong? Why, you know, did the person leave? And you know,
and if you're saying people don't know what to say around death in general,
exactly,
that's
it's a really
people definitely don't know what to say.
No, exactly, absolutely, and we need to pull that stigma out.
Yeah,
you know, because the family.
How do you approach someone who, say, has lost someone to suicide? I mean, do you just say what's on your mind, or are there? I don't know. Is there a different way of approaching it? How do you really comfort someone in that situation? The
way I would always try to do it is because, you know, if someone's got an illness, let's say cancer or some whatever it is, and they die as a result of it, you can kind of get your head around that a little bit easier, can't you? You know, they had an illness. It wasn't their fault really, you know, and this is what has happened. I suppose you're trying to help someone to understand that too, that that's an illness too, and that they struggled with this, and ultimately it cost them their lives, and that's the tragedy there. And so you're trying to tap into that, not like the guilt and shame. You know, you're trying to pull that away because that's no one's to feel. You know, you're trying to help them out of those kind of thoughts. Embarrassment. I've worked with teenagers who are incredibly embarrassed that suicide has, you know, impacted their lives with a parent, amongst their friends and that, you know.
Okay.
And so you're trying to help them out of that. If it's not embarrassment and if it's not like, you know, shame, what is it that we're dealing with here? You know, it's the tragedy, it's the sadness of your father or your mother's death.
Yeah. What happens when parents lose a child? And as a parent, that's you know, in air quotes, your worst nightmare, you know, that we just don't even want to think about.
We don't even want to think. As you said, I don't even want to think about that. In some ways, I have 3 daughters myself, but of course it's on my mind a lot more than it should be on my mind.
Yeah.
You know, and when my youngest daughter was born, she had a very serious illness and she didn't nearly make it. She was in intensive care for 3 months and all that. And so we got a glance. We glanced at it, you know what I mean, as a family. And thankfully it all turned out okay. But I mean, I've worked with, for parents, I'm just thinking of a case that I worked with recently where her son died and from an illness. And she spoke about feelings of futility, you know, feelings of like pointlessness.
So what's the point in going on?
What's the point?
If this is what life is going to hand me.
If this is what's going to come into my life, and if this is what having kids is, you know, this incredible sadness and grief, what's the point in this, you know? And I heard Nick Cave. I don't know, did you ever listen to Nick Cave or that? I heard him talking recently. I think he lost 2 sons.
That's right.
And he was talking about this, and I was, you know, because he's an interesting kind of guy, and he was saying that in some ways it brought him in contact with the magic of life, the miracle that, you know, that's that reframing of this incredible tragedy, that the uniqueness and how special life is, and actually brought him to more of an awareness of the gift of life.
Yeah.
And I suppose that's a hard place to get to.
It is, and we hear people talk about that, and you think, wow, wouldn't it be amazing to be able to have that wisdom and that growth, that's how you view the life? But none of us want to go there.
No, Jesus.
You're
no.
like, do you know what? It's great you
yeah.
have that, but I don't want to have to go through that to get where you are.
I want to have that without going through that.
Yeah.
Kind of like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that's I suppose that's tapping into that kind of understanding about life, how fickle this whole thing is, how magical this whole thing is. 400 quadrillion to the power of 150,000. That's the odds of life. I mean, in betting terms, it's almost zero. And here we are in life.
What do you mean in terms of actually just getting
the chances
here?
of being born are almost zero. In betting terms, it's almost zero. It's 400 quadrillion to the power of 150,000. Those numbers are so big. Honestly, it's like winning the Euro Millions every Friday for the rest of your life. And then even on beyond that, because if we're sitting here, we're an unbroken chain right back to the start of humanity. Someone in our line didn't get killed or attacked or died earlier to be here.
Yeah,
It's incredible. The odds of us being here is absolutely incredible. And then when you look at the biology of all that, meiosis and all those different things, it is almost zero. I mean, it should be zero, but yet here we are. And I suppose this death talk is about really celebrating the magic of life. And a part of life is like Shakespearean, it's King Lear, it's suffering and it's sadness and it's loss. But it's also this other stuff, and I suppose that's what Nick Cave is saying. It's if you can move it from that to like looking at what are the chances of this happening, look at the chance of your life, the magic of this and the gift of this. Yes, people that we love will get lost as we go through lives. We will become lost ourselves in this in this experience. But it's an incredibly magical gift that we have here.
Yeah, but the human brain is so frustrating.
Oh God!
In that we would love to walk around in a state of blissful, gratitude for everything and everyone in our lives, but we start freaking out about bus timetables instead. Yeah,
well, you have to live in the bus timetable and brushing your teeth and getting your thing and the bills, and so that's that. But
and isn't it the other side of the coin? The brilliant part of our psyche that helps people to establish a new normal, say in a war zone, in Gaza or Lebanon or wherever you pick. There are people dealing with horrific circumstances, but our human ability to put that to one side, and get on. The flip side of that is that we also get deep into normal really quickly, and we can't see the beauty.
Yeah.
As much as we can put horror aside.
Familiarity is a kind of a killer to all the beauty, isn't it? I often say when I'm traveling to Cork, God, if I didn't see these mountains, I'd think they were magical, but because I see them so often, and you see your family so often, it's like the wallpaper in the house, you don't even notice it. But it is an important thing to be aware of. And I'm beginning to see it now with my 14-year-old daughter, who told me recently she's got a boyfriend and nearly died when she told me. I was like, how quick this is moving. From a girl who was playing with her Barbies, around the house and hanging off my every word, to now, I'm moving on in this normal, and it's normative maturation.
There's another man in her life.
There's another man in life. I don't like it, Dermot.
Oh, I have a 13-year-old. I'm not there just yet.
It's coming.
I'm still funny.
Yeah.
For now.
But you know what I mean? All of that is the normal development movement towards moving into adulthood and all that. But I can feel we're moving to, and you can feel all that. If we were just a little bit more present, I know you do a lot of meditation, all that. It's about being kind of like taking the time to celebrate what you have right now and not be worrying about what's gone or what's coming, all that, just to kind of see your family and to kind of really experience it.
How do you work with someone who's dealing with grief then? And maybe pushing against it a bit? Like, maybe there's someone listening to this who's dealing with grief. Maybe it's something that is recent. Maybe it's something that happened a long time ago, and maybe the reverberations are still there. I remember I didn't really cry at my own dad's funeral, and I was sort of looking around at my siblings crying and being really upset, and I was like, I don't know what's wrong with me. 12 years later.
That was stress. That
really?
Was, yeah. How am I reacting? Why aren't I reacting like everybody else? There's stress. That's absolutely stress. That's grief there.
Yeah.
Why aren't I crying like everybody else and all that kind of stuff?
Well, I was 30 at the time, and he also never got to meet my kids because he died the year we got married. At age 42, I was driving into work to do the Republic of Telly, and I pulled the car over on the coast road and bawled my eyes out for about 15 minutes 12 years later. And I was like calling for my father out of, you know, not out of conscious decision. It was just coming from somewhere. You know, so maybe people are experiencing grief in different ways.
And at different times.
Yeah.
And it's like when the brain is ready to process it, sometimes it's like, okay, I think you're ready to experience this now. That's probably what happened to you.
12 years.
Yeah, I know, but seriously, that's the human brain. It's incredible.
Yeah, just filed it away.
Yeah, just like, so you can just move on here for a little bit.
Yeah.
And now.
Well, it did actually coincide when I look back. It coincided with me beginning to meditate and to get a bit silent and learning to let stuff out of my body. And I guess I felt like I'd kind of maybe opened a tap.
A little valve.
Yeah, and it was ready to come.
But that's incredible. And I always think a way is a way through grief. I often think about going through it rather than kind of like, that's the end of grief now. Because it's kind of like with you, through your like that.
Yeah.
Who knows when we'll come back again, you know, and all that kind of stuff. Those feelings around your father. Same for me about my grandmother and all that kind of stuff. It pops up now and again. I can hear her voice here talking to me all the time.
But I think it's one of the greatest gifts that meditation has given me is opening that valve and not being afraid of it. So for instance, when I used to go and see my mom, and it was obviously quite stressful, and you know, she'd forgotten who I was and she was anxious and all those difficult things you deal with when someone has dementia. But I used to leave her, go out to my car and just go, okay, and I'd bawl my eyes out for about 2 minutes and just let all that stress and frustration and confusion and grief out, and then go, okay, I'll drive home now and, you know, we'll have dinner. But that was a beautiful gift to be able to just, before it built up and turned into something else,
absolutely,
just let it go in the moment. And then I'm not saying I was enjoying myself or I was like, that's that now. But I really felt like I was present to it and allowing it to process in the moment.
And the valve idea, analogy is lovely because that's what it is. You know, when the valve is closed and it's like building up, it's going to be a toxic churn inside. But letting it out so that it doesn't build up like that, that's a really important thing with grief. But also, I think, finding meaning in the relationship you had with somebody and finding meaning in your life now without the person in your life. It's a really important part of like moving through it, kind of like, you know, to start to thrive again, because you're going to grieve. That's a part of the process. That's a part of losing someone. But finding meaning now in the world, having lost somebody and having not have that person in your life, that's a really important step towards thriving again, because you can thrive after someone that you love dearly and really profoundly dies. You can thrive again, but it was not going to be an immediate thing. You're going to have to go through that grieving process. But there are ways out of it, and I suppose that's an important thing for people to realise, the commemoration part of the gift of having them in your life, right? And then finding meaning in your life now without them physically here with you.
And when you say finding meaning, sometimes people find it difficult to relate to that.
What does that mean?
Do you mean?
Yeah, getting back into things that brought joy to your life. You know, what was it that you did before when this person was, you know, that when you were thriving in your life, what was it that you were doing that you really enjoyed and that you loved, and what gave your life meaning? I mean, that's the really most important thing. What was it that gave you a sense of belonging in the world? Because when someone dies, we can profoundly lose all that stuff.
Maybe we feel like that stuff doesn't have any meaning without them there.
Yeah, but that's what you're trying to come to, is like, it can have meaning without them. It can have meaning again without them in your life, say physically in your life. Because I always feel my grandmother's kind of with me.
Yeah.
You know, I know I'm aware she's not physically with me. I'm not like Norman Bates. She's not in the rocking chair there. But I know she's not physically with me. But I feel like, and I don't mean that in any religious kind of, I just feel like she's there a little bit. And so then when I think of my life, there's meaning in it. And then the work that I do, there's meaning in that. And then I have her and I talk to her a little bit about that stuff. And so she's, you know, it's not like this really terrible thing. It's about finding that meaning again, and that I was lucky to have that. And
do you think
for a period of time,
talking to them, to people we've lost,
for me,
is a healthy thing?
For me, I do. Yeah, I absolutely do. And
in your head or out loud?
Sometimes, because like she lived with me for so long. You know, when I was 10, she was living in the house, so she used to call me in the morning. Rich, she used to call me like, you know, in the morning. You know, and so I still do it. And some mornings when I get up and there's no one in the house, I go, "What, Gran?" Messing, just pretending like, you know, that she's there, just to have it. Yeah. And when I go home to my house in Cork where she lived, I'll always go into her and go, Jesus, Gran, you're a fine old age now, girl. Because she's always said to me, how old do you think I'll be? And she's talking about all these old people that live with her. And she's like, if he was alive now, he'd be 125. She always said that. Like, geez, if you were alive now, Gran, you'd be 100. And, and so it's touching into grief, but it's also touching into like celebrating them and feeling that somehow they're with you there.
Yeah. It's the conversations with my dad that I never got as an older man that I would love to have. Like when he died when I was 30, I was just getting married, and I was such a different person back then. Not that I'm so wise now, but my priorities and everything were different.
When you're 30, exactly.
I was big partier, and I didn't. I guess that there is a bit more wisdom there now. And when I look at he overcame alcoholism in his life and was from a different generation and was an amazing provider, more distant than dads are these days, but that was kind of the generation.
That was the kind of parent of that time.
Yeah. And I never got to have the chats of, when you were dealing with that,
how did
with
you
the
do it?
alcoholism, how did you navigate? Like, how important was faith and spirituality to you? What made you anxious? How did you deal with anxiety? What was keeping you awake at night? What were your tools for? I just would love to have a conversation.
And do you get frustrated with yourself at that younger 20s that you didn't do that?
I think you get a flash of it. And, but also I think sometimes you can think, if they were around now, I'd be having the most deep conversations. And, in reality, he might just say,
grand.
Pass me the screwdriver. And that might have been it. Sometimes we can sort of project different versions of them onto their memory as well, as if they suddenly would be, having these deep and meaningfuls, and maybe that they wouldn't have happened to the way I imagine them in my head.
You're right, and it's something I'd often work with. Sometimes we can have fantastic posthumous relationships with people. You know what I mean? I'd often meet couples who have had really conflicted relationships, and the moment one member of the couple dies, they have this wonderful relationship. They glorify the. Do you understand?
Okay,
we can live posthumously with someone, and it was the most perfect relationship of all. We do that. I think Irish people do that. We're very bad at speaking badly. We're very good at not speaking badly about the dead.
Yeah.
We kind of apotheosize them and glorify them in some ways. We don't really speak to the reality of how difficult the person was, when after they've died. And so we can think about those future relationships and think, that would have been fantastic if he was alive and we could have all these conversations. But again, I suppose it's like celebrating the relationship you did have.
Yeah.
And you can still have those kind of conversations a little bit. You can have your internalized father's voice there to answer some of your questions.
Yeah.
What do you imagine he'd say if you said to him, how did you get over that alcohol? How did you deal with that? That took incredible strength. You can have a little kind of conversation there.
Yeah, I think so. I guess to tie in with meditation and mindfulness and just we have to allow the space for those conversations to happen in our minds. We tend to reach out for, help and advice from lost loved ones when we're in crisis or panic mode.
Bargaining
sometimes.
with them. Like.
They kind of, please God, please. If ever you're going to step in, step in now.
Exactly.
I think we have to allow the spaces for them to have the quieter whispers that aren't putting out fires as well.
Exactly. No, that's it. And that's the living with the loss from day to day.
Yeah.
I suppose it's about learning to live with it rather than like it's going to go away. It's like, how does your life have meaning? How do you thrive in your life now that you've lost this person, that this person has died, but that you had this meaning, you were lucky to have this incredible relationship with someone. Of course, it's painful. Of course, it's profound. And of course, it's personal. It's a deeply personal experience. I think that's what we get lost in the grief of the 5, these 5 stages of grief. It's like we don't go through grief like that. In my experience, we don't. There might be some common markers like denial and acceptance and all that kind of stuff. But it's a deeply personal thing.
It's not an online course.
It's not an online 5-step course.
I've completed stage 1.
And now grief has stopped. You know what I mean? Like you're saying 12 years later, you're driving around the road and all of a sudden this wave of grief that was so healthy for you. I know it kind of felt like a lightning bolt probably hit you, but there was something so kind of cathartic in that.
Yeah.
And we all go through those moments where all of a sudden we get hit. We're a little bit more open. The channels are open to it, and all of a sudden it comes in and we allow ourselves to kind of like let it out. That stuff is the stuff of healing.
Yeah.
And it's not like you I suppose this is another point of grief. This is a really important point. People often feel guilty. I hear this so often. Feel guilty for moving back into their lives and thriving because they feel like they're leaving the person behind, as in they're forgetting them. I had a teenage girl who said to me one time, I was laughing and all of a sudden I got this wave of guilt because I felt like I was forgetting my dad. I was letting him down by smiling again. And I said, and I was trying to get her to see that that's what dad would have wanted for you. You were celebrating him. And I wasn't, just reframing it. You weren't letting him down with that. You were celebrating him. And that's what dad would want, for you to celebrate your life and to thrive. But people feel terribly guilty for having a happy moment, and for enjoying. I actually heard. I was listening to this crime story about the kid who was murdered in the Marty Highland murder. Do you remember Marty Highland? Was some gangster? Some kid was in there doing plumbing, and they remember they killed him.
Yeah.
The mom was talking I heard her talking, and she said, the first time I was on a holiday and I was enjoying myself, I felt incredible guilt.
Yeah.
And that's what people feel. They feel that guilt, and it's like we have to watch that part of grief. Because that's actually celebrating your child. That's celebrating the life that's gone, because that's what they'd want. They'd want you to be celebrating your life and thriving in your life and moving through the pain, because of course it's painful. But to a new life, it mightn't be exactly the life that you had before. It's not about recovering that life. It might be about discovering a new way of being in the world, having lost somebody so meaningful to you.
Yeah, that's really interesting. You don't hear people talk about that guilt.
Yeah. No, you don't. And I've heard it so many times. It's an interesting and it kind of roots people. It stops people from moving on because they're frightened. This is the thing. What will get lost if I move on? I'll forget Dad. I'll forget those memories. I won't hear his voice anymore. So there's something about the grief keeping them connected. You know what I mean? And what you're trying to help them is now. No, the grief is moving here. It's moving with your grief. And it's kind of trying to move towards discovering a new world where you're thriving in your life while holding on to what you had with your, whoever it was that you lost there.
Yeah. Richard, that's really fascinating. Thanks for your time.
Thanks, Dermot.
And your wisdom, as always.
Thank you very much.
I'm sure people, and I hope people, got a lot out of this conversation. So thanks a million. Great to have you.
Thank you very much.